So David Levenberg, thanks for joining. Can I just start the whole thing off by just saying like you were like the nicest guy ever. And like I was in a huge pickle a couple of months ago and I called you and because I was in your neck of the woods down like near High Park and I was like, "Hey man, can you help me out? Like I need you to come meet me right now." And you're like, "Yeah, no, say no more. Where, when, like I'll be there." And that was so huge. So just first of all, thank you because you like saved saved my ass.
My
So I
pleasure.
appreciate that. Um, dude, tell me, I don't even know how you got into the business or kind of like how long have you been doing this now?
Whew, taking me back. I actually just completed this weekend. I had to do my renewal for the 2 years, on Rico with the education.
What was that, your fifth time? So
Yeah,
10 years.
10 years. I'm at a decade now. I feel old.
Wow. Holy crap. How
Uh,
did you start?
I was, I've always been in sales. I did some jobs in insurance before this,
What kind of insurance?
life insurance.
You
Yeah.
were doing life insurance?
For a brief time, but very happy that I made the quick switch.
Really?
I just found the sales process was very different than a house, right?
Totally.
More analytical and a little more, there's a different sales nature there because a lot of it is life insurance, right? So you're talking about death, right?
Oof.
And that's a heavy conversation for a lot of people. And you know what? Something else that I kind of clued in early on was with housing prices going up so much, less and less people are being able to actually afford life insurance. So I actually find that demand has decreased on that side because everyone is putting so much energy financially towards being able to own a house or a property, right?
I think out of all the people that I know, I was always super impressed with how you did it. The first time that you were like, "Come on over, let's hang out," and I went over to your place, I was so impressed. It was like that was that moment where I was like, "This is a guy. Like we're the same age, kind of. Like he did it right. He bought a place that he's also got other units in that he's renting out." So that was always super impressive to me, and I always thought to myself like David Levenberg did it right, and
Mhm.
like all first time buyers should be kind of following that example. I didn't. I was not smart enough. I mean, but um, but
Well,
I wanted to.
you still got that condo going on, so you're in the market. That's what
I'm
matters.
in the market, but I mean, like the way that you did it was awesome. Like, first of all, when did you buy your place,
I bought the property in 2018.
and how? Do you mind if I ask you how much you bought it for?
I paid just over 1.3 at the time.
So 1.3 million,
Yeah.
and you have how many units in it?
Currently, there's 3 units in it. They are three above grade units. So there's currently no separate unit in the basement, but it's actually on my list right now. I've actually booked a meeting with a contractor to come and give me an estimate. I want to understand the cost of adding a kitchen down there because I've already got a separate entrance and there is a bathroom down there already. So if I added a kitchen, it would be possible to separate the unit and then have it as a fourplex.
Okay. And this is a semi-detached in High Park.
You got it.
Okay. How did this happen, man?
I, I,
Because
I will say Junction, but yes,
okay, John.
it borders. I'm right on the cusp of High Park North and Junction. Yeah.
So how did you find that place?
Oh, geez, that story takes me back. That was, you know, I'll give full credit. That was actually my father that helped me, my late father, who helped me find that place. I went to a property on MLS. The neighboring house was actually listed by another agent in my brokerage at the time. And it was a good house. It was a triplex. It had one unit in the basement and then one on the main floor, and the third one was the upper unit. And it was a good unit. It was a good house. The layouts were a little weirder in it, and the best unit was the upper unit, which was tenanted at the time. Um, had a great garage in that property. It had multiple offers. I did put an offer on the property, and I didn't get it. It sold, way above what I thought it was worth. And during that visit, I actually showed up late, and my father and my mother were on the street. And knowing my dad, who he is, and I have his tendencies, and that's why I've been successful in this business, is he likes to go and talk to anybody. So he saw this lady on the sidewalk taking out her garbage cans, and he went up and asked her, you know, what do you like about the neighborhood? Can you tell me some things about it? How long have you lived here, kind of thing? And she was very sweet, and they had a conversation which was very positive. And here I am showing up, and my dad's talking to a random stranger, and I'm trying to focus on this property. But then he finds out from her that actually she has a reason for selling. And at the time, I wasn't so open to it because, you know, people can say, yes, I'm interested in selling, but where's their price? Are they actually serious and all that, right? So I was more so at the time focused on the one that was listed. When that didn't sell, I we got her contact that day, and I followed up with her, and I went to have a meeting, and I saw the house at that point. And it was a unique situation, that house, because they had it as two owners, and one of the owners had actually passed away. And so it changed the dynamic for her, where she wanted to stay in the property, but she was kind of forced to sell. Her estate wanted the funds. She had two children at that time. So, it was luckily a good situation for all of us, where I could purchase the property and give her a lease back for her to stay in the property, and take the unit that was vacated by the previous owner.
So then she became your tenant
She's still my tenant today,
to this day.
to this day, which we're actually coming up on 5 years in October. And I've become friends with her family, and she's also been in that house for like 40 years. So she knows everybody in the neighborhood. And so it's kind of been a nice welcoming to the neighborhood in that way. And people know me, oh, you bought so and so's house. So it's been definitely a positive experience.
And you live there.
And I live there, yeah.
Wow. And so you bought it without it ever being on MLS. Am I understanding that correctly, kind of?
You are correct. I was, and it did help me with structuring the deal. When I did buy the house, I did some renovations in the property that were um, needed more than I thought that was needed, but it gave me the opportunity to also customize the unit for myself in the way that I wanted it to be.
And when you were kind of looking to buy something, were you planning on this? Kind of like getting a place that had other units that could kind of you could rent out and have that help you with the mortgage payment, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was really a goal of mine, probably 3 or 4 years prior to purchasing it. It was kind of, I wanted an kind of the foundational piece to be there. And, down the road, if I don't live there, it hopefully, can carry itself or provide cash flow down the road. And it was, I only went to see maybe two other properties, and, representing clients and going and seeing 10, 15, 20 different properties. I will say I got, the stars aligned for me, and I did get lucky with the process kind of being smooth. And, timing is a lot of it, right, in the market. 2018 was a bit of a weird time. They had introduced legislation. The market was just kind of coming down, and it was just kind of finding a trough at that point in time. And so, you have to get a little bit lucky in these markets.
And so you'd been already selling real estate for, by that time, it must have been, what, 5 years?
Exactly. Yeah.
And how did you start off with, like, how did you get your first clients? Were you kind of like old school like I was and just kind of door knocked and cold called and kind of did what you had to and grinded out those first couple of years until people actually started to trust you?
Definitely. Those first few years are always a grind. I joined a team at that initial stage because I felt to learn as fast as possible to get to that speed where you're ramping up. I was making 100+ phone calls a day. The goal was 100 no's a day, and I will say it takes a toll on you, right? And but you also figure out the more efficient ways. It doesn't mean that that's not going to work, and it still works to this day, right? Um, but there's definitely more efficient ways you can be using your times as you gain more experience, right?
I feel like that's how, at least in my experience, that's because I was just door knocking like a madman. I mean, I know the mailing routes, right? Because in those same areas, I was kind of flyering as well, which I mean now I don't do. I think it's a big waste of money, but it works for some people. I just it's not my thing anymore. Um, but I know how many houses there were in those neighborhoods because I was sending them flyers every month, and based on how many times I knocked those particular neighborhoods in Richmond Hill and how many streets there were, and I would track exactly like when I hit which street and like when's the last time I had knocked that street, that kind of thing. I estimate over 2 years, roughly speaking, that I think I knocked on about 80,000 doors
Wow,
in 2 years.
80,000.
Yeah, I mean, I was 26 or 27 years old at the time, just starting out in a career, had no professional experience whatsoever, and needed to get it going. And there was no like IDX platforms like there are today, right? Those only came out, I would say, like 2 or 3 years after I started. And so there wasn't, so I started and I kind of said like, okay, well, what do I do? I was also on a team and they kind of just said, well, you hit the pavement, man. You go out there and you knock on some doors and you figure it out. And so that's what I did. And yeah, like I feel like there are more efficient ways to do it for sure, 100%. But your knives get sharp when you
Yeah,
do that.
and it worked for you. You had success.
Major success.
Totally.
But it was just because of the consistency, like I was really me and my former partner were ruthless
Hmm.
about it, like just relentless, man. It didn't matter rain or shine. We were out there just knocking doors and building up the business. And yeah, you definitely do develop skills, I find, doing that you cannot replicate any other way,
Hmm.
right? And that's why I was always like, I kind of looked up to you as well and still do because at that time I remember thinking to myself like, uh, here's this guy like started a few years before me and is successful at it and is like kind of like doing that grind, and then is also kind of like a secret hippie like me, and I'd run into him at yoga class and I'm like, oh man, this guy's doing it right, and I'd like to kind of like work my way up like that.
And I still plan on I'm still doing door knocking today. I just sent an order for flyers. The way I'm viewing it, I don't want to just send the flyers. If you are going to send the flyers, you have to door knock it.
Yeah, 100%.
That's the flyers are just um, and the icing on the cake. It just helps what you're doing. It's another point when you're at the door having the conversation. But most importantly is going to the door, having the conversation. So our team just sold a property on the East End, and we've actually had like within the last 3 months a number of sales within this pocket. So I've got a flyer that went to the printing press this week for that, and then we've also got a recent sale on the West End, which I've got another flyer going out.
And so what do you find is something that your opinion has changed on, where like you kind of used to do it one way at the beginning of your career and now you've kind of said like, well, this may be tried and true, but I don't think that this is for me anymore.
I find cold calling, if you don't have any point of reference, is a little hard. Not a little hard. The 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 odds of it transitioning are lower than going to the door. Face to face, there's just a human interaction there that someone can understand and jive with you right away or not. But in that phone conversation, yes, you can hit more volume, but you really gotta, it's harder to be a sniper in that way. And so I've kind of stopped. I like to call if there's any point of connection, meaning we did a past deal a couple years ago, or we showed a property together at one point, or we put together an offer, but it wasn't successful. And, maybe you didn't buy, you know, at that point in the peak of 2021 and you took a back seat. But those are, if there's a connection point and it's a little warmer, then it makes more sense.
I also find like Canadians in general are a lot more courteous, especially like to your face. So if you're knocking on somebody's door and you're a guy trying to just like build a career for himself and you're standing there on their doorstep, it's so rare. I used to get door slammed, but very rarely. Very rarely. It almost never happened. And I find that it's just a simple like factor of human connection. And the more we remove that natural aspect of a human interaction, the ruder people get,
Hmm.
right? So it's like face to face, least likely to be rude to you, and then on the phone, a little more likely, and then keyboard warriors, like that. There's like no and anonymity. There's just no that scales infinitely. I think there's no like boundary to how rude people get.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And, if you're the homeowner and somebody's approaching your door, I have respect for that person, right? They're taking the courage, they're pounding the pavement. If I was looking to hire somebody, I would want someone like that,
Yeah,
right?
hustler.
Exactly. And so right away, it personally gives them credit, and I'm open to a conversation. Doesn't mean, I want the door-to-door salesperson. I don't want to be sold on it necessarily, but at least I'm willing to hear what they have to say.
100%. Like, unless they're kind of what are they called? The religious folk that knock on doors?
Uh, I know who you're talking about. Yes.
Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah.
That's it.
I feel like there's actually a center around my house.
There's one right
Yeah.
by my house too,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I've always been like, because I was a door knocker, even though I'm like, guys, let me stop you right there. I'm Jewish, all good, but I respect the effort, you know?
Totally. I'm gonna use that line next time.
Yeah, good, like good for them, man. If that's what they're doing and they believe in it and whatever, go for it, man. I strongly believe that canvassing is definitely a way where you can really build the skills necessary to succeed, and not just in real estate, but I mean just in anything,
Yeah.
man. Just being able to go out there and meet new people and confidently take on the nose, I think is super valuable lesson, super important, and I always really respected it. Tell me a bit more about your house because um you've done some work to it. How how long did it take like to build up? You built up your career. It took you 5 years to build up a down payment. You still had help with it. You went in, you got it, you made sure that there was multiple units in it so that you could cash float a little better so you weren't like choking on a mortgage. Did you lock in a mortgage? Were you at a variable rate? Did you renovate and then put tenants in? Were there already tenants? Like, tell me how did that happen?
Yeah, so the way I structured it was I actually took a private mortgage initially.
Really?
Yeah,
Why?
because I knew I was going to do the renovation and I wanted flexibility in terms of closing that, and I wanted to pull out equity, put in the cost of renovating, increase the property, and then reevaluate the property, and then structure a proper mortgage at that time.
So like a 1 year term?
Exactly. I did a 1 year term, but I had flexibility when I could call the loan and pay it off. And so I think it only took me about 8 months, give or take. And then at that time, I locked in a 5 year rate, which will come due in 2024, near the end, about a year today. And at those rates, it was interesting. It was a great rate at the time. It was sub 3%. which in today's market is a deal. Anybody
Oh,
would take
yeah,
that.
huge steal.
Yeah. And but then, shortly after that, I took a fixed, and rates, we all know what happened. They went sub 2%. And here I was stuck paying close to 3, and I thought, oh, I made the wrong mistake. And it's really interesting how quick things can change. Everyone was on me, myself included, variable's the way to go. And variable has been the way to go. The last 15 years, it's been the way. Um, have we changed tides now? Are we on the other side where for the next 10 years, 15 years, you know, fixed rates are the way to go? It feels like they're, even if it's not, just people want a surety. They want to know what that payment's going to be. And that makes sense because it's such a large payment that when it changes, it can put a lot of financial stress on you.
Totally. It totally can. And when you, well, I guess the next question that it pops into my head is your mortgage is coming due in a year from now. How do you feel about that? What do you, have you thought about it?
I I think and circling back to changing the property from a threeplex to a fourplex is definitely something that comes into play there. Um, kind of ballparking the rates at today's numbers, and trying to offset that with the increased cash flow by converting one unit into two would kind of balance out the numbers and keep things, a bit steady.
Are you going to use the equity within the property to make the fourth unit?
Potentially, as watched a video yesterday regarding the HELOC change and how it's changing from 80% to 65%.
Loan to value.
Yeah, loan to value, exactly. Which is, you know, it may not sound like a lot in percentage terms, but when we're working off large numbers, $1 million, that's $150,000, give or take, that, you need to pay down first in change before you can access the capital.
Does that apply? That only applies for investors. Like your primary residence purchase can always still be an 80/20, right?
I, my understanding was it was a general. That's the way I took the information, that it was irrelevant of the designation, because my property is a personal resident, right? I only live in a portion of it. I will check into that, and it's also something that I'm gonna actually book an appointment with the bank and understand, because if that cap's gonna happen, I would not hit that principal for like another 4 years potentially. So what I might actually do is take out the funds now, and even if I don't even have a reason for it, and just offset that by maybe putting it in a GIC, and it's kind of a wash, maybe I'll lose a few points, but at least I'll have access to the capital. Whereas potentially for the next 4 years, if I understand the change correctly, um, I won't have an option to take that capital.
That's a big deal.
It is a big deal. And when you think about it, like a lot of first time buyers have been getting payments, down payments from their parents by them taking out a HELOC loan from their principal residence, right? They've been sitting on sometimes half a million, a million, $2 million of equity that they can easily take out $300,000 to give for a down payment. And with that change happening, it's going to reduce that flexibility, right? So it's going to be an interesting change to see.
So do you think that that's going to make is it going to slow down the market in general, or is it just going to make it harder for first-time buyers to get in?
I think it's going to make it harder for first-time buyers, which are already, you know, they've been getting it on the chin from all angles,
For
especially
years,
for years. Yeah, and it's funny because the government actually, has come out with their plans of first-time home buyer savings accounts and stuff,
which I did like. I
which
did like that.
it is positive. But, I think a more important thing would be like, uh, really reducing the land transfer costs for them,
Oh,
especially in Toronto.
such a cash grab.
Yeah, it that's
It's absurd.
it's wild. I don't think we, you know, we're all excited when we're buying a property and it kind of just gets rolled into the numbers. But when you really break it down, it's a massive amount of funds. And it also, once you use that first time buyer credit on the next property, it's not a possibility. And hopefully you're going from that, whether it's a $600,000 condo or $1 million semi house, to whatever that next step up is, that's a higher purchase price with no credit at that stage.
Yeah, I think like it hits you know, first time buyers less so than it does people who are upsizing. If you're upsizing, land transfer tax is an enormous cost. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars. And if you're buying in Toronto, you get dinged with it twice,
Mm.
which is wild. I know that they were talking about maybe adding it in York Region as well for a little bit, and then that was like very quickly shut down
Yeah,
because that's just an enormous cost. But I think overall, the fact that it's not something you can roll into the mortgage either, right? It's not part of your down payment, it's on top of.
yeah,
That makes such a huge barrier to entry for most people just on that cost alone. So yeah, I agree with that. I think like if they're really wanted to help creating some tax incentive by reducing the burden of a land transfer tax would probably be the best thing to help first time buyers for sure.
totally. And then on that point of the HELOC, I think it's going to also make it more difficult for property owners to get that second or potentially that third property, right? Because let's say you've got the one with your principal residence and you've got the equity, but it's going to be harder to pull it out to maybe go buy that condo unit and, have that as an investment and rent out that property.
And when you were buying as well in 2018, I mean, that was a down market.
It was, yeah, it seemed like a down market. The activity was lower at that time.
It was, but it wasn't. I I think there were. I remember seeing doom and gloom headlines, kind of apocalyptic, uh, of an apocalyptic nature, similar to actually kind of right now. But you kind of you took advantage of that opportunity rather than, you know, kind of donning the tinfoil hat. And how, what are the differences between what's happening now and what that was like back then, do you think?
Oh. I think the narrative has a little more credit these days to that doom and gloom just because of where interest rates are.
Totally.
Like we are talking 2 decades, 20 years ago, we were at those rates. And think about where a property was 20 years ago from a purchase price point of view, what that value was on an average basis.
On an average basis, it was probably the average price was, well, let's see. Real estate prices double every 10 years approximately in
Yep.
Toronto. So that was 20 years ago.
And I would say they probably did even better from that point, right?
Right.
So, we're probably talking 300% increase at least
Totally.
from that point. So we've got, a purchase price that has 3x, and now we're back at the same interest rates of that time. That's where, you start to look at the numbers and you're like, do they make sense anymore?
I I I mean, we were talking about this before. I kind of flip back and forth on this so often where I'll kind of be doing my research and I'm doing my homework and I'm doing it for, if I'm gonna do a YouTube video or if I'm just meeting with a client or whatever, and it's that type of question that gets asked all the time is how's the market doing? And sometimes I'll read some stuff and I'll be looking at it and I'll be like, this economy is way over leveraged. Prices of real estate are insane. And I'll read something and there's data there that point to, oof, this is not good. And I kind of had that cringe moment where I go like, I don't know about that. That really doesn't look very promising. And then other days I'll kind of look at the numbers again and kind of, you know, not that I'm reading articles going back and forth. Usually the articles are always doom and gloom or apocalyptic because that's what sells.
Totally.
But I'll look at the data myself and be like, well, there are sales. And even though we had the most aggressive 12-month period of interest rate hikes in Canadian history, right, that have ever happened, that only produced about a 20% drop in real estate prices that have now since rebounded almost entirely. So, or at least rebounded by at least half.
Yep.
So, I think that I flip flop on this issue so much. And I think that no matter what I say, I mean, well, this is going on YouTube. So, everybody in the comments is going to be like, oh, it's coming down. I can't wait. No, no, no. Right. And
A lot of those people, though, typically want it to come down so that they can buy, right? So there is a little bit of bias.
and the funny part is about that is that if it all comes tumbling down and real estate prices drop by 80% or some ridiculous number like that, the economy and overall, like we're all going to be in such a shit show
Yeah,
that, you're not going to be buying real estate. We're going to be fighting over carrots and potatoes at that point.
sure.
Like it's just going to be such a different world that the last thing you're going to be thinking about is buying real estate. You're going to be thinking about how do I survive? How
Absolutely.
do I get through today? And I think that that's what's missing typically from those comments. But I mean, it doesn't matter at this point. I kind of like have resigned to just not caring too much and just sharing my perspective on it because on YouTube, I mean, you could say the sky is blue, and on YouTube, you're gonna get shat on in the comment section for that. So it doesn't really matter. I think it's more of just I do flip back and forth. I'm not quite sure what's gonna happen. I do think that our economy is over leveraged right now, but I mean, we're taking in a lot of people right now.
That's the biggest thing right now. We have not seen this immigration ever, and it's not going to slow down.
No,
If anything, it's going to ramp up more than what we're at right now. And that's the deciding factor right now. That's really helping to keep everything moving in a positive way and just adding stability. Like when you look at rent prices, uh,
insane.
it's staggering, right? And interest rates being where they are actually fueling that as well because people aren't in a position to buy, right? Qualifying at 8% plus is difficult these
Yeah,
days
forget it.
for a lot of people. So I really think that immigration is going to keep things from not collapsing. But the one thing I'm worried about is the government waited, the Bank of Canada and most central banks out there waited too long with rates being too low. And so you have to ask yourself, are they going to do the same mistake? Are they going to make the same mistake with rates being too high for too long
And over tighten.
and over tighten? And from what I've read and from conversations that I've had with people way smarter than me, when you over tighten, it's not something that you can just reverse instantly because when you're pulling a rope, there's going to be slack in it. And that time of slack is going to, it's not something that you can reverse instantly. Even by cutting by 1 point, it's still going to take time for that to feed into the economy because everything is happening with latent effects. And that's what interest rates do, right? And it's been really interesting to see the narrative shift just generally. It seems more positive these days, where everyone knew it was saying, we're going to have a recession. It's coming. Everyone's waiting for it. And then it
Nothing.
it hasn't come. And so I think this is part of it where we're moving away from that as a narrative, which potentially puts us in a risky position for it to happen in the future.
And this is exactly why I mean, I named the show Supply and Demand, is because at the end of the day, we have way, way more people than we have beds, than we have houses, than we have place to place people. And we're taking in so many immigrants and they're helping to prop up our economy. I mean, we need them here,
Yeah.
but it's also fueling real estate prices, both on the rental side and the resale side. And couple that with the Bank of Canada possibly over tightening, which I mean historically is what they've done in the past is over tighten, and they're trying really hard not to right now, but I mean they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. There seems to have just been a ton of money printing that has happened
Hmm.
throughout COVID, and inflation kind of got out of hand. So, the future is very uncertain. It is a lot different than it was when you purchased back in 2018, even though it was a down market at that time.
Yeah.
So, what do you tell people when people ask you, like, hey, David, should I be buying right now? Or should I just be holding off and waiting?
I think it really depends on a case by case basis. You know, what is the reasoning? First of all, are you buying for investment, meaning to rent out the property, or are you buying to live in it yourself? And that really steers the ship, which, the bigger conversation. What's the reasoning? When you're looking at from an investment point of view, cap rates are inching up. So, and with rents being where they are, there's a lot of properties that, if you can buy them at 4.5 cap rate today, um, and if rents are, let's say, 30 at least percent below current market, there's a lot of upside there. Whereas when rates do come down, because they will come down, we are at a higher threshold of the band currently. Will they go back to sub two? I do not think so. But even dropping 1% and going into the range of 3.5, 4%, and then having a cap rate that you could possibly increase to 4.5 to 5.5, that's a property that's going to carry itself, right? So there's opportunity there. And right now, there are, especially in August, which is a slower month, right? People are traveling. It's the most traveled month, right?
Is it?
I think it's that, and obviously December, but I think it's kind of less known about August because it doesn't have like a Christmas holiday where people are gathering with their family. But with school starting in September, it's kind of the last hurrah to go. And so I think it's actually a great time to be putting in lower priced offers, right? And if you don't put an offer on paper, you don't put yourself in a position to get a deal. And I think there's a lot of people that are sitting on the market and are going to have to adjust their price down, right? Which is being where rates are, they're having an effect, especially on the investment properties. On a first-time home buyer, it really also depends on where you, or not even a first-time buyer, just as a principal buyer for your own residence, what price point are you looking at, right? You know, there is a lot of um, floor price on the $600,000 condo, just from a cost of constructing a new condo today, right? Development charges. That stat has wild, right? In the last 20 years, those are up 1,500%. The government makes more money than the developer on a newly constructed condo unit. So when you have trends like that, it's gonna support prices. And I think there's a lot of upside there still, right? With rents increasing, there will be a time where hopefully it's less on appreciation and condos balance back where it actually can carry itself.
I've always kind of thought to myself that for those who are thinking about getting in the market and maybe have a down payment and are ready to kind of get their foot in the door with buying for the first time, that with these rental prices that we have right now, which are just so high, that if you're comfortable where you're living right now and you're able to do it, or you're, a young person living with mom and dad and you're okay kind of like toughing it out there for another year or two, is just to buy something and then just rent it out for a couple of years.
Absolutely. I think it's a great option. If you don't want to go spend 2,500 or $3,000 a month, there's a lot of people that will actually. Last night I submitted an offer for somebody in the Distillery District. Beautiful unit, great view, one plus den with parking and a locker, and it's $3,000. And that's, you know, relatively a good deal these days. for something that has like a great view, lakefront view, and with parking in a great neighborhood. And that's there's a lot of those people out there, and he's coming from out of town, right? Coming to do school here, has the financial means, and there's a lot of those people coming.
It seems like people who are coming from out of town, immigrants especially, they seem, well, I mean, according to the government, they're coming in on economic programs, meaning that we're weighting the point system to favor people who are coming here as skilled laborers,
Mm,
who have educations or skill sets for jobs that are more in the professional sense and less of blue collar or trade work and have money.
mm,
So it seems like those people are kind of flooding the rental market because rates are so high, it's impossible for them to just get in and they don't have any credit. But from what I'm understanding, how long is it going to take to really build that credit? What, 6, 12 months maybe? Maybe 18 months. But then I feel like after that, we're going to see kind of like a flood, a tsunami of buyers entering the market all at once, and we're building less than we have been in the past few years due to red tape and a whole bunch of other stuff. But in the city of Toronto, we build roughly about 35,000 units a year,
yeah, yeah,
right, on average,
if we're lucky.
if we're lucky. And this year, we're not even hitting 30, I
Yeah,
don't think.
yeah,
So how how is that all going to mesh? Nobody really like knows, but I mean, it just seems like at this point in time, from what I can tell, it's better to buy and wait than it is to wait to buy.
absolutely. I think that really is the narrative and the truth to the long-term sound investment of real estate in the city, that we're just not keeping up with demand. And there's going to be this supply is going to hit in a few years. We're going to notice it, right? And in 2 years or 3 years, if we see prices have a jump up in that years, that's because construction was slowed now, right? And when real estate prices go up, they don't go up in a natural way, right? It can be all of a sudden in 60 days, there's a 4% jump, right? Just because the supply and the demand fully are in balance, and there's a push, and that becomes a new level that we're operating at, right? And
100%. I mean, it seems like Toronto, well, compared to most major cities in North America, Toronto seems to be an anomaly in terms of real estate pricing. And we have this emotionally based, frantic buying frenzies that happen more regularly here because our supply and demand are so out of whack, and we don't really have any other season. It's really just like panic
mhm,
or FOMO.
yeah,
But like when the FOMO hits, it's insane,
yeah,
and when the panic hits, it's Armageddon. And
totally.
it's like there's no dimmer on it. It's just a light switch.
I feel like we're more we're kind of in a healthier zone right now where things are kind of more just chopping along in a sideways motion, which is also healthy for a period of time. Um,
Kind of refreshing.
yeah, for a change, it is definitely nice. And I would add, obviously, Vancouver is, a unique market with,
Bananas.
yeah, like, and they had it before, and then we kind of played catch up, but even rents are higher there, right? And
They also just they just implemented a cooling off period on all
yes.
residential transactions.
Yes, which most times we are following them. So hopefully it doesn't, it will be good, but it will also add another dynamic. I don't know. It's a hard thing to anticipate that. It's all also good for us as a market to see how does their market adjust with it. And, is it a positive thing? At the end of the day, I like free markets. I like that the owner, business to business, consumer to consumer, human to human, we get to choose what kind of contract we want to decide on, right? And if I want to put no conditions, then I have the choice. And if I want to put conditions, then I have that choice, right? And I don't like that the government is going to mandate something on how we need to conduct the business.
Yeah, I lean more libertarian in terms of the real estate transaction as well. However, I am looking at how the actual effect of it is not actually providing more protection for a buyer. It's actually buyers are gaming the system,
Mm,
from what I can tell. Because yeah, you're right. Vancouver is definitely the kind of sandbox where they'll test out different, legislation for regulating the market, and then it comes here afterwards. This one, I'm actually not too concerned about it coming here because buyers seem to have gamed the system, and there seems to be a lot of backlash over this, where if you know that every single thing is conditional no matter what, and I think they put like some ridiculous, like 10 business days or something,
yeah,
that if that's the case, why not put offers on half a dozen places?
yep,
And it's now just, and then they're all going to be conditional. Work on each one, see which one you can get into a lower price point, and then do it, execute on that one. All that's done is flooded the marketplace with offers.
yeah,
And so now everything's being gamed.
yeah.
So I'm less worried that we'll see it here, although it is a concern. But I mean, look, when the supply and demand are this far out of alignment, I don't know if anything's going to really help. Prices are just going to continue to go up. You can't really suppress the pricing. You can suppress demand with interest rates,
Mm,
for sure. But without adding supply over time, it is what it is. People need a place to live, and we don't have it. I mean, we saw that with COVID, I think more than ever is that when all hell did break loose,
mm,
and in those first few months of COVID, when it was pretty apocalyptic and it was, if you were a tinfoil hat wearing kind of guy, you were just part of the crowd at that point. I mean, everybody was.
mm,
The only things that really mattered were back to basics in the most fundamental sense, food and shelter.
mm.
And we just so happened to be in the shelter business, essentially.
Yep, essential.
Yeah. And that's what happened is the pricing skyrocketed.
And interest rates did, add some gasoline on top of that, I will say,
Oh, huge amounts of
right?
gasoline.
Like the cheapest rates that we,
Free money.
yeah, absolutely. It actually didn't make sense not buying property at that time, especially like locking in a rate of that magnitude. I heard even whispers of some people locking in 10-year rates at like 3%, which is just, staggering when you really think about that.
I wish I would have
You know?
locked in for 10 years. I locked in for 5.
Yeah. If only we had the US system where you lock in and it's, for the life of the mortgage, which is 30 years typically, or 25 years, right? And that, I feel like they learned their lesson from their crash in 2007, 2008, which was very different from ours. You had people buying with zero down, or, you know, fake scores and fake income and all that jazz, and people owning 5 properties. And it was really a game over there. But I think regulation like that would help the consumer because it would give us, less risk from a variable point of view. But I almost feel like our banking system has too much power and it benefits them, right? The variable system. And so I don't,
Benefits of the banks.
yes, of course.
Yeah.
And the banks, they're very profitable, right? They have a money making machine here. And I don't see that, change coming, but it would be a great change, I think, at least as an option.
So basically, interest rates go near zero or basically zero, free money, the banks make a fortune. Interest rates skyrocket up, the banks make a fortune.
Mm.
It seems like a no lose scenario for the banks. No matter what happens, these guys are just absolutely killing it.
Totally. The one you can buy their stock just to help you make yourself feel better, so that
Mm.
if they're making money, you're making money. But of course, when your mortgage payment, goes up 10, 20, 30%, even 50%, it really it's hard to make yourself feel okay with that.
Right, because they're not even people aren't even paying down principal anymore. They're
Yeah,
just paying pure interest.
95% interest. And it's common. It's more, I don't know if enough people understand how many people are in that situation with amortizations being stretched 70, 80 years.
Right, which you can't renew on.
No, well, you can't, but it sounds like the lender, the government body is being more friendly, like to help to communicate to banks that when a client is coming to renew their mortgage, you know, hopefully they'll be a little more lenient because what we don't want to see, it would be a sad change in our economy for so many people that have dedicated years, decades maybe, to buying a property, and then whether it's a year or two, or they've owned that property maybe even for 5 years, and they're forced to sell it simply because of an interest rate change,
Well,
right?
the bank doesn't want that.
The bank doesn't want that, but the bank also wants political win for them to bring down inflation and stuff. And, you know, with people selling their property, yes, it feeds into rental, but it's also helping to maintain the price point of homes, right?
Right, so the banks then just lobby and pressure the regulators to allow them to continue to renew those mortgages, even if the amortizations are stretched to, I mean, infinity or whatever, right?
Yeah,
And so the banks don't want a situation where their shareholders are going to be holding the bag because their portfolios of real estate are now being flooded and pushed onto the market, devaluing their entire asset base
exactly.
because they're partners with the consumer, right? Like it's not just the homeowner's home, it's the banks as well.
Yes.
And so that doesn't help anybody. And so I think that I think you're right. I think they're just going to continue pressuring regulators and legislators to allow them to renew mortgages at amortizations that are way higher than 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah. With the hope that interest rates will come down and there will be a better opportunity for that to come back into balance.
It almost kind of sounds like, and again, to kind of go back to being a tinfoil hatter for a second, the whole system kind of revolves around us being able to kick the can further down the road.
Yeah, but I would say that with the government themselves, right? They run a deficit,
Huge
a
deficit.
huge deficit. And I love that clip of what's her name? I always forget.
Christian Friedland.
Yes, or
Yeah.
with her getting post about the interest rates being she commented that they're, yes, historically low right now, but our debt was ballooning. And it's just, you know, them like a consumer, they got caught with their pants down, right? They're in the same boat, but yet, they can print money, they can borrow unlimited, they can raise taxes, they have a monopoly. So they're not going to go broke. They're not going to be forced to make the hard decision. They have you know, a monopoly, so they can, pull different levers to increase tax revenue or print money and monetize the debt. But it is an unfortunate thing because long term, that's what's gonna, hurt us,
Totally.
right? And I do think we are in a different era for the next decade where inflation is going to be higher. I think there's been a tendency to overinvest in certain areas and lack other ones. One as farmland, has been decreased, right? Yes, there are like positive technology things that are coming with hydroponics and vertical growing, but I don't know if it's happening at the speed it should be happening, right? The government should really be backing that because if we had a lot more investment in our food sector and actually brought down the cost of food,
Yeah, because
that
we import most of it.
yeah, absolutely. And, first of all, that would help from a pollution point of view, just from importing and, transporting the food. And if we reduce the cost of food, that's pretty much a tax break to every person here because it's a necessity. We don't have a choice. We have to buy it. Whether that apple is $2 or $1.50, we don't really have a choice. You can make other choices on what fruit you want to buy, but on a whole, it's still going to get bought, right? And so I think those are the places where the government should be focusing on. And that's one of the big things I have an issue with is the carbon tax. Like I don't understand it. I think it's a real malinvestment and just at a time where the economy is really hurting and people are hurting, when you raise the cost of gas, it affects everything.
Of course. Well, energy is the cost of everything.
Yeah.
When you raise the cost of energy, you are raising the cost of everything. 100%. And I think that the insidious part about inflation is that it's so easily spun
Mm.
in the media, which is, I mean, our media in Canada is heavily funded by the government, which I don't agree with. That's just my personal opinion. I don't think it's right. I think it's the fourth estate should be completely right separate from government influence, but in Canada it's not. And I think that the way that they'll spin things is just crazy. I remember Christian Freeland promising that they were not going to increase the deficit, right? Inflation's running wild, and then she comes out and says, "Well, we have this amazing plan that we are going to pass this bill and spend money in order to help fight inflation."
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking to myself, like, is anyone really going to swallow that? That was the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You're going to spend money. The government cannot spend money without printing money because it's in such a large deficit.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, basically what she was saying is in order to fight inflation, we're going to print more money, which is the most backward thing. I couldn't even believe it
Mm.
when I was watching it. And but they're able to spin it. They're able to kind of give the perception that they are there for us and that whenever they're providing something to us in terms of, you know, a program for this and a program for that, and they say, well, it's going to be free this, free that. Nothing the government provides to us is free. We pay for it. We pay for it either through taxation or inflation.
Absolutely.
And inflation is insidious in the sense that we are paying for it.
Yeah.
It falls on us.
It's the hidden tax.
Correct. And so I totally agree with what you're saying. I think that the focus on just getting back to basics and
Mm.
reducing the cost of energy, of food, of the essentials that people need to survive
Yeah.
is where we need to be focusing on and where no focus is being
N-
placed.
No focus. But I don't know how much worse we can get. So in a way, I'm optimist in the way of I feel like we're near the bottom of the barrel and we could do only better from here.
I hope so. I
Yeah.
I hope so. I agree.
Yeah, and you reduce those things, what it does is it really helps to allow people to focus time and energy on investing in themselves, investing in their business, investing in relationships, right? From a point of view of cultural and business, and that's what makes a great economy, right? And that's something that it feels like we've slowly gotten away from over the last few years.
Totally. It's been a really wild ride. No one saw this coming in. There are always going to be black swan events that happen, but I am not really at this point convinced that the black swan event is necessarily going to happen with real estate in Toronto. I just don't see the alignment between supply and demand kind of flipping in the ratio that it is right now. Our consumption rate is just not going to change in the other direction, I don't think. And one other thing that I was thinking about that was probably really going to change things is AI.
Hmm.
because we're clearly on a precipice of change with that.
Yep.
And because it's such a huge paradigm shift, you what did Einstein say? You can't solve a paradigm from within the paradigm. You have
Mhm.
to evolve into a paradigm beyond it in order to solve it. So I think that there's this change coming, and it's going to be a complete paradigm shift, and we have no idea how that's going to affect everything. And that's the one thing that I think is like the big kind of question mark that I'm always thinking about of like, well, how's that going to really affect everything? How is that going to change the way that we, you know, construct our society?
Mm.
How's it going to change our labor market? How's it going to, how's that going to affect everybody? And um, and so that's the one thing that I think is like the huge question mark where nobody can really guess. We can all just kind of assume and what do you think about it?
I think it's one of those situations where it's going to take a long period of time for it to really have a bigger impact on the economy. It's definitely coming and it's definitely here already, but it's going to take a lot of time because it also needs a lot of resources and money invested in it. Um, yeah, it's definitely on like, the minimum wage worker. We've seen this already, like with McDonald's, having virtual kiosks for ordering, right? That's already reducing a cashier in that situation, right? And making warehouses more efficient, right? And then it's coming to AI is coming to, virtual trucks, right? Tesla, right? Doing that, or Amazon doing that. So it is here and it is coming, but it's going to take a long time. That impact's going to be interesting. Is it going to free us up to be more creative in other ways? Or is it going to make it's going to make us more efficient, right? Of course. So then thus could that be, another technological revolution where it kind of spans for the next decade or two, which
Maybe,
very well,
you know,
very well, because when you're reducing barriers to information, humans are resilient in that way, and we will think and implement things that we can't even imagine
we
right now.
can't because I was listening to Elon Musk talking about it, and it was super interesting the way he described it. Is he described our economy as capita times GDP over capita.
Hmm.
And that he was referring to Optimus. So I don't know, Tesla's building these humanoid robots, and it's already insane what Boston Dynamics is doing is already pretty wild. But combining the concept of AI at a very high level, maybe AGI, with the advanced robotics that we're going to be seeing, and if we have no cap on labor for capita, so we're having humanoid robots able to take those roles, take that position, and work basically endlessly without sleep or food. Um, yeah, it's possible that maybe in 10 years, 15 years, when that has all kind of collided and, in a beautiful eruption of robotics and AI, that we're able to build, you know, real estate very quickly for everybody. We're able to farm, land very quickly
And efficiently.
and efficiently.
Yeah, reducing the costs, right? Passing on the benefit to us, the consumer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll see what happens. That's like the one question mark that I've always been thinking about over the past like few months is like, well, how's that all gonna just, collide in this hopefully a good way and not in like a, Skynet way. But
Hmm.
but yeah, I just want to say thanks so much for taking the time to like come here and chat. Um,
Absolutely.
I always love talking with you because you've got, you know, got a good head on your shoulders, man, and you're a really good guy. So thanks so much for coming. I'm gonna cut this here so that I'm not like killing myself here on editing, but thanks for coming. I'm just gonna prop you because I have a cold still, but
All good. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.